Chapter 27, The Ties of the Past. The Ties of the Past. The sun was hot, though the breeze held a cool weight that promised rains to come. For once Jahara was glad of the arid conditions, a dried-up hollow that would likely return to being a small watering hole once the rains came, made for a good place to hide, any dip on those flat plains enough to conceal them from the surrounding farms and highways as they closed upon Marmont. Jahara had brought them to a halt about an hour south of the town. The company gathered upon the cracked clay bed and mostly grouped under 3 scrubby acacia trees for what little shade they could come by, the long grass about them thrumming with an unseen orchestra of crickets. The first day of flame rule, midpoint of the year for those who followed the calendar rather than the sun and seasons, and Jahara's thoughts lingered, as they often did lately, on the grove she was both dreading and longing to see again. It was a strange day, halfway between the midsummer yet to come, and the summer solstice that had passed her by that year with only a few simple prayers upon the road to market. But at the grove there would have been something to celebrate the day, perhaps a gathering of those druids near enough to come, a chance to share news and plans for the midsummer that was but a fortnight hence. She let her mind dally over the memories while the breeze played with her hair, thinking on the people and the life she had left, driven out into a world by her desire to see it bettered, and for good or ill, none could say she had not lived by her conviction. It was close enough to high sun to take a meal, those about her gradually settling in a rough circle to rummage through packs for rations and water. Jahara allowed herself a smile as she sat as well, feeling strangely warm to them all after so short a time. There were more than a few pink faces in the group. She had handed out the last of her sun balm that morning, though it had done little for fairer of them, Godith and Arian laughing lightly as they examined their glowing cheeks in the shine of Morgan's blade.
"I look like a boiled lobster." "At least your skin is clear, I've so many freckles now I look like been splattered by a passing cart."
Godith laughed.
"You don't look so bad, Ari. And they'll fade again once you're out of the sun."
"Really," assured Morgan,
"you both look to be as fine as any maid I have ever seen." "Oh, seems the sun may be affecting more than just our skin,"
quipped Arian, tapping the side of her head for good measure. Morgan treated them to a deep, measured laugh. Such matters were certainly no worry for him, his bared torso lean and swarthy, a mane of thick dreadlocks just brushing his shoulders to give him the air of some great, smiling lion.
"What are you 3 laughing at?"
trilled another behind them. Arian's smile vanished in an instant, the girl turning her back quite deliberately on the newly arrived Jole and pulling at Godith's elbow to encourage her to the same.
"Nothing you need concern yourself with."
Jole took the hint. It had not taken long for the knowledge of her betrayal to be circulated and confirmed about their group, and since they had left the boat, many had no time for their collaborator. Jahara watched the girl move glumly off again to take a seat near to the only other of their company who was usually alone, Gideon hunched over and sharpening the dagger he had acquired with long, measured strokes, deep-set eyes glowering at the world from under that thick, black shock of hair. Barely a nod as he received a hunk of cheese from Seth, the gangly man returning to his own knot to share the rest. He, Lucian and Gregor, 3 Tathyrans bonded over their skills with the bow.
"Now, whose flasks have we here?"
called Jovian blithely, the tall man dropping back into the hollow behind her, deep brown arms slung with a half-dozen swinging flasks, his fellow Amnian, Tavit, and the elf, Lindril, following him down the bank, similarly laden.
"You found some water then,"
confirmed Godith, tripping over to collect her and Morgan's flasks. Tavit nodded.
"Well, it was all looking pretty grim, until our elf here attuned himself and found us a shepherd's catch pool." "I nearly fell in,"
the elf corrected dryly.
"I could have broken my neck."
Jovian ignored him.
"Yeah, good job he was with us, or we'd have had a very thirsty day of it."
Lindril rolled his eyes, tossing his long blonde fringe back from his face.
As I keep telling you, I am from Riathaven. I had never even left the city until I joined Melisson.
But Teyvat was shaking his head, grinning as he gave the shorter man a hearty clap on the back.
Nah, these things are in the blood. You mark my words, just another 10 days out in the wilds and you'll be skipping through the grasslands and climbing trees, spouting on about the glory of nature.
The elf sighed, though he seemed to take their teasing in good humor. Javan's attention already moved on to the woman stood across the hollow from him and doling out the bread that had been stored in her pack, her short flaxen hair held back from her face by a folded blue scarf that hid the slight point to her ears.
Here, Chell, toss us some of that.
She straightened to send a flatbread winging across the circle.
Right, I've 2 left now. Here, Rowan, 1 for you and Garth. And you want any, guard?
She called, though she put much less contempt on the word than others who used it, Enric glancing up from where he had been treating the huge pus-filled blister that covered Condis's heel, the man's flushed face screwed up as he awaited the lance.
Ah, no, thank you, Chell. You want it, Condis? No. Will you just get on and do my bloody foot?
Enric adjusted his spectacles and returned to his impatient patient.
Here, I'll have it,
offered Eshen, the stocky Tetheran making no move to hide the half he had already received from Gregor. Chell barked a brisk laugh.
You're not having it, you greedy arse. Here, Belid.
She continued, throwing the round to the hulking figure sat to her left, the man's shoulders about as wide as she was tall.
You can have it, big lad like you needs to eat more.
He chuckled mildly, tearing it in 2 to offer half back to the woman.
You sound like my mother. I wish she sounded like mine,
muttered Curry. The Termian stood holding Gitali's halter while another of the locals, Amos, crouched beneath gently milking the beast.
Curry, you eat like a ravening pig. I pity your wife, she will never leave the kitchen. Here, Petal, that's as much as she'll be giving today,
Amos sighed, finally heaving the half-filled pail up to Sarandaw for the girl to make the round of waiting cups, her smile bright on her plump, tanned face. Once a farmer and a milkmaid, respectively, the pair were a gentle reminder that not all Ballspawn found their living by the blade.
Ah, my Gitali, you're as bountiful as you are beautiful,
Curry sighed, giving the cow a friendly pat. The man glancing up as Aruna entered the circle with a thick.
Ah, fair Aruna, there's room for you over here.
The girl quirked him a wry smile, sitting pointed down at Ithic's side.
I would like nothing more, dear Curry, but I fear your wife there may get jealous.
He laughed loudly, throwing an arm about the beast's thick neck.
Damn! At least I still have you, Gitali.
The cow watched him a moment with serene brown eyes and bowed to the grass once more.
Looks like the honeymoon is finally over for those 2,
laughed Tigran, glancing up from where he was spreading Jahara's bomb thickly over his raw arms. Enric had warned him the new skin would be more sensitive to the sun and he was taking every precaution.
And don't I know it,
sighed Curry, the man half bent to entreat his new bride.
Don't you remember, Gitali, when we would dance until the dawn, our hearts filled with love and starlight?
Chell crinkled her long nose and took a healthy bite of dried sausage.
Careful, Curry, she has 4 stomachs, that's a lot of sick.
Jahara hid her snort in a cough, waiting for their laughter to fade and the rest of them to find their seats, a few moments drifting by in silence as all took the simple pleasure of a meal, before she finally rose her voice to the business that had brought them there.
As you are likely aware, the town of Marmont is but an hour or so north of here. Ah, Marmont,
sighed Eshen deeply,
I know it well. You are from here?
Asked Jahara, Local knowledge made for a useful ally, even if it was merely an idea of who to barter with at the market square. The man nodded mildly, flask passed halfway to his mouth.
I worked as a guard at the Marked Dice, an income gambling hall over on the west side, at least till the owner shopped me into the guards. That I could go back now.
His wistful smile was quite at odds with his narrowed eyes. Jahara enjoyed a change of heart.
Right, well, it will not be wise for all but a couple of us to enter the town. Word of the escape will have reached this far north by now and all strangers will be under suspicion. So you're just going to go in for supplies and then we're off again?
Confirmed young Rowan. Jahara titled her head in an evasive half-nod.
In a way. The next leg of our journey depends upon the welcome I receive here. I have allies within the town, and since the rest of our journey takes us along the river Ith, I plan to try to acquire a boat. You've allies here,
rumbled Gideon.
What kind of allies?
Jahara steeled herself for the backlash.
The Harpers. Harpers?
Cried Lucian.
You're a member of the Harpers? Yes, at least, some among them still see it as such.
Jahara had thought this revelation would merely make them more wary, but to her surprise, many about her were smiling, the round of muttering holding an air of optimism she had long ago ceased to feel when speaking of her brethren. The realization landed with a dull thud in her chest, pressing there a moment, to be swallowed up by other worries. Across the circle, Curry was looking cautiously confident.
Well, the Harpers, is it? I know they ain't too popular here in Tethur, but they're all right, aren't they? I mean, they work for good and the like. Do you really think they'll help us?
Asked Godith. Jahara shifted uncomfortably, somehow their distrust was easier than this guileless hope.
I do not know. The Harpers do work for the good of Faerun.
She felt obliged to establish,
but some are worried on the impact the children will have on this land. My past alliances have been a source of conflict with some of my brothers. You're talking about the girl, ain't you?
Said Amos gruffly,
the one your lot showed up to save.
A round of grim looks. Frith's reputation within the survivors ranged from awe to abject fear. If they were ballspawn, she was something else entirely.
Not wanting to cause trouble,
the man continued, in that phrase that always guaranteed the opposite.
But how'd someone like her even get captured in the first place?
Lucien was frowning.
What are you getting at, Amos? Nothing, I'm just curious. The girl's a powerful ballspawn, as strong as that Yagashura I'd say. What if this all isn't part of some plan to get rid of us, sending us off to some haven, when all we'll find is a quick death? Freya wasn't like that.
Countered Jole. Ariane snorted.
Her name's Fritha, and you've a nerve to even speak of her after what you pulled. Deals with the guards, I ask you. Now, Amos,
reasoned Belid in that quiet way of his,
if they'd have wanted to kill us they could have done so after those dragons left. That still doesn't explain how she got captured,
agreed Garth, through a mouthful of bread. Jahara sighed inwardly, it was time to step in.
Fritha allowed herself to be taken. We heard of the camp in Marmont, she wanted to see the people there freed.
More than a few about the circle looked skeptical. Amos gave them a voice.
She wanted to rescue a load of people she had never met. It is true,
confirmed another, Jahara surprised to see Enric adding to her assurances.
Fritha threatened to torture the location of the camp from me when I was captured after my patrol lay in ambush for them. I like her more and more,
laughed Chell.
Later, she allowed herself to be caught by my company and taken to the camp, so Jahara and the rest of her group could track her. All to save some ballspawn. Anyone else of her power would be happy to see dead.
Amos snorted. Jahara shook her head. With attitudes like his, it seemed inevitable the children would wipe each other out.
Fritha believes if the children are saved, then Bal cannot return. She works as much for herself as you.
This more selfish slant seemed to lend an air of believability to the thing, Curry piping up to convince those few still with doubts.
Come on, you all know the girl was with me trying to escape that place, that's why she was up before the block. We can trust Fritha, and we can trust Jahara, too, no question.
He's right, said Gideon, in an unexpected show of support, the man glaring about him from under thick brows, just daring anyone to say different. No one did.
Good,
nodded Jahara, taking advantage of the silence.
We are decided, then. I will enter Marmont with Ithik, collect the horses we left in the town and restock our supplies. Then Ithik will return here, while I contact a friend of mine within the Harpers. Even if he refuses to help, he will not cause trouble for us, and upon my return we can plan the next stage of our journey, be it by boat or by foot.
Nodding about her, and Jahara rose, leaving them to their meal and talk that seemed more subdued than before, Ithik throwing the last few things into his pack as Aruna moved to join her at the clearing's edge.
How long do you think you will be? About 4 hours or so, though I imagine Ithik will be back much sooner.
Jahara straightened to heave her pack onto her shoulder, her gaze drifting about that large circle of bodies to catch on the bespectacled figure sat mildly in amongst them, a hound amongst wolves.
Aruna, keep an eye on Enric while we are gone. If he makes an attempt to leave the camp, you know what to do.
The girl looked aghast.
You don't think? This is not about what I do or do not suspect. But the precaution must be made. Are we ready for off?
Rumbled Ithik behind them, a hand giving Aruna's very messy braid a friendly tug.
I'll pick you up something nice in town.
The girl smiled, a lot of worry behind those hazel eyes.
Just come back safe, Ithik. You be careful, too, Flower.
Jahara avoided eye contact, but kept her head high. The last thing she wished was to look like she was trying to go beneath notice. The press of people and carts moving slowly through the gates and kept constantly on the move by the guards. A small company of 6 or so watchmen were arranged about the gateway noting all who entered, though they made no move to halt anyone and, the druid wondered if it was not all just for appearance's sake, a show to calm a worried populace. Apparently, they looked enough like the usual mercenaries to be waved through with the clatters of wagons and merchants eager to make a coin in the town. The talk of war might have reached there, but the threat did not boil on the horizon as it did in the south, and about the capital it was business as usual, albeit it a business watched over by a newly birthed garrison. Jahara drew a breath, trying to quell the heavy dread that was grinding low in her stomach as they passed under the gate, and she felt the packed earth beneath her boots become cobbles, the high stone walls for an instant looming even higher, hemming her into that chaotic press, and she was suddenly glad of the large presence beside her, Ithik unruffled and amiable as he elbowed his way through the crowds.
Excuse me, sorry there, Flower, here, mind yourself, mate. Gods, look at this place.
He muttered, nodding to another group of guards gathered at the busy shrine to Shindakul that held a prime location just before the gates.
You would think the Ballspawn army was only a day behind us. Marmont is a wealthy town, its citizens will demand protection, even at the cost of the farm holdings that surround it.
They walked on, the breeze of the plains lost in the sheltered city, and Jahara felt almost suffocated by the muggy heat. The press of the gates was a few streets behind them now, though the wide avenues were still busy with guards and citizens both. the inn they had once stayed at emerging from the curve of the street.
With Timora's grace, they will not have sold our horses on yet. Once we settle the bill, you can head to the market and I will go straight over to the Oyster and Pearl and contact Themis. I do not wish to be here a moment longer than we must. Well that.
A large arm across her chest halted her dead, those walking behind cursing loudly, though a thick ignored them, sidling causally to stand in the shade of a butcher's awning.
Recognize him.
Jahara followed his nod to the inn and the raised wooden terrace before it, her eyes falling on the knot of soldiers taking ale about one of the packed tables. Something about their dark-haired captain sparked a memory, an image of him lain upon grass, the bloody welt where the apple had struck bright on his temple, and now she considered it. A few of the others looked ominously familiar, too. Her stomach twisted to add another knot to those already there. It was the company who had halted the caravan on the road to Marmont, plucking out the children one by one.
Unfortunately, yes. Do you think they'll recognize us? I do not know, though I suppose we are about to find out.
They would have to be sat on the edge of the terrace, wouldn't they, right next to the gateway to the central courtyard and the stables within. Jahara led the way as they weaved across the street, her haste nearly seeing her collide with more than one hurrying citizen, and it was all for naught, a fuss of pilgrims on stout mountain ponies appearing in the gateway to halt them right beside the men. Jahara did not look up and, for their part, the guards ignored the activities of the street, their voices loud above her as they engaged in some boorish assessment of the tavern's serving women. A polite nod, Jahara forcing an easy smile as they shifted back to allow the clerics twice the room they should have needed to pass, and they were at last inside the courtyard, the soldier's appraisal lost to the general din of the street, and her stomach loosened somewhat. She was getting too old for this. The ostler was quite disappointed to see them. There had been a few inquiries about Brianna's fine grey warhorse, and he would have made a good profit on the beast, even with the month of stabling. But he let them settle the bill without complaint, a groom quickly saddling the beasts with the tack they had arrived in, if only to save them carrying it, a thick leading the horses after her as they stepped back onto the busy street, the tall beasts providing a convenient cover from the terrace at their side.
Good then, we can part here and I will meet you back at the hollow. I'll head over to the market and pick up what we'll need. You be careful now.
She nodded, his warning already forgotten as she turned to set out again, her mind running over the many paths her meeting could take. Themis could be absent, unwilling to help, or even unable, so many possibilities. She was only 2 steps along the street, when that voice sneered her name.
Jahara.
And the druid turned with a growing resignation to face the taller woman, her angular, tanned face made all the sharper by her ugly smirk, ash-blonde hair scraped back into a tight, unflattering bun.
Param,
replied Jahara simply. The woman's anger did not give her time for more.
You are a fool to show your face here after the trouble you've caused. Rahir told you to stay away from that camp.
Jahara knew if this was to end, it would have to be quickly.
I do not know of what you speak, Param, and I have little patience to find out.
She did not even manage one step, 2 men she had dismissed as idle bystanders suddenly at her arms. Jahara kept the building panic from her voice with some difficulty.
I am not here to cause trouble, Param. No, you never are,
the woman hissed, leaning in now. She was sure the druid could not strike her.
But it follows you, like the reek of all your feral kind. Poor Themis was sent away in disgrace after it was found he helped you from the city. But you always could find allies, couldn't you? Derman had been my mentor until you arrived, and then he changed his song, didn't he? Jahara will take command, Jahara will lead here.
Because, the druid rejoined, putting a scathing emphasis on the word,
As I recall, a month before I arrived, you headed a group sent to investigate a caravan the Harpers believed were smuggling Black Lotus across the border, only to be discovered and murder the entire convoy, including the civilians traveling with them. They gave us no choice.
Param screeched back. They were beginning to draw some looks.
You were always Derman's pet and then you turned and bit him, just like the mongrel you are. You are pathetic. You could have rebuilt his trust, proved yourself to him again. He gave me responsibility because he knew I could be trusted not to let sentiment cloud my judgment. Judgment? You murdered him for that ballspawn.
The guards on the terrace were definitely looking over to them now. Some stood and craning to better see the source of this disturbance. Athik still stood before the gates with the horses, knowing enough to realize she was in trouble and looking torn. A snatched glare from her kept him there. If the guards were to get involved, they ran a chance of them both being discovered. Jahara returned her focus to the woman before her.
So are you here for revenge?
She asked quietly. Param's face was a cool mask once more.
No. Rahir wishes to speak to you. I will come.
The woman smiled.
Yes, you will.
And Jahara did not struggle as her stave was taken, her arms pushed behind her and, under her cloak, she felt the heavy iron cuffs lock cold about each wrist. Param a pace before their three as they escorted her along the busy street, Athik left to stare helplessly after her. But it was not to the Golden Garter they took her. Jahara trying to make a note of the turns and streets she was whisked down, the way becoming quieter and more dilapidated as they went, and she suspected they were somewhere in the east of the town when they at last halted. They were at the back of what seemed to be another tavern from the commotion that was emanating from the front of the building. Jahara held firmly at each elbow while Param announced them to a dull iron door, before she was being bundled inside and up the stairs. Along a narrow corridor, doors flashing by her until one was opened and she was pushed inside a small room, big enough only for the bed and chair it held, the window boarded up to leave only narrow cracks of sunlight to pierce the gloom. With the layout she had seen, the place had likely been a brothel to the tavern below before the Harpers had taken it over. Jahara tried not to think too much on that as her gaze fell on the sturdy bed. Her captors were fussing under her cloak, one of the cuffs that bound her unlocked, though her relief was cut short as it was promptly snapped about the heavy bed frame with a dull chime, her pack and belt removed to leave her completely weaponless. The two men, finally satisfied she was secure, departed to leave only Param, though she had little time to crow about her victory, the woman scooting from the door to make room as Rahir stepped in. He looked fatter than before, or perhaps it was merely her intense dislike coloring her view, his bulk trembling under the tent-like tunic as he waddled in to make the room feel even smaller, narrow black eyes almost lost in that round, bulging face.
So you are back, Jahara. As expected, it seems,
she rejoined sharply, but the stout man just chuckled, jowls trembling.
Such vanity, Jahara. We survey all who enter the town now, we have done since news of the attack on the camp reached here. Indeed, the local garrison find our help invaluable.
Jahara could barely choke out the words in her shock.
You are working with the guards? What happened to Harper impartiality? We are not even supposed to operate within Tethur's borders. Exactly.
Rahir agreed smugly.
The guards have always suspected our presence here in Marmont as within other places of influence across Tethur, they would be foolish not to. But how long do you think such animosity will continue when the Harpers help avert the coming war? We work together to end this ballspawn threat once and for all, and I am proud to be the first to build an alliance with the authorities for the good of Tethur and of Faerun as a whole.
Jahara lunged for him, unmindful of the manacle's bite, her only desire, to see that superior smile torn from his face.
You fool! You arrogant fool! You would sell these people to the guards for your own gain. You are fool, Jahara, for returning here. I know the camp you were heading to fell, the merchants bringing tales of dragons and demons, and an emerging ball-spawn army. So what are you doing back here?
Jahara swallowed, her story prepared from the moment she had laid eyes upon Param's sneering face.
I returned to Marmont to ask the Harpers for aid. There are powers arising to the south and ones bent on war. My companions oppose them, but we need help, contacts in the southern cities with whom we can organize a resistance. Indeed,
Rahir considered slowly.
And where are your allies in this? I left them in the south, in the town of Indravayat. So you came all this way north, alone, just to ask your trusted brothers for aid?
The derisive snort said all that was needed regarding her explanation, the man leaning over her with an air of menace that spoke of a political strength well belied by his fleshy physique.
I know you were at that camp and I know you travel with two of their kind, two famed children of the north. I imagine that pair will go a long way to exonerating the Harper's name here.
His smile lingered as he turned to the woman next to him.
Param, when she entered the town, was any with her? That dark elf, perhaps, or one of her wards? No, but their reports state there was a man with her at the gates, tall, a northerner by his pallor, dark-haired and way-worn. I can likely get a better description if needed.
Rahir nodded once.
Do so, and put the word out, I want him found. As for you,
he continued, returning to her with that familiar sneer,
you will remain here until I find out what you are planning. Much has been set in motion since last you were here, and I will not see it ruined by your meddling.
Jahara dived for him again, her free hand just whispering against his tunic as he turned from her.
Rahir! Rahir, you cannot do this! You arrogant fool! Rahir!
Her rage was cut short by the slam of the door. Arana closed her eyes and leaned back, letting the brightness bath her face and neck, her robes parted to her camisole and hitched to her knees, many of those about her in similar states of dishabille after so long. For all Jahara's warnings, Enric had made no move since their departure, and Arana had found herself relaxing in the easy camaraderie. Their few tents had been loosely pitched to provide some shade from the beating sun, and it reminded her of those later summers spent with her friends, a group of similarly aged youths who had for the most part grown up together to find apprenticeships about Loudwater, every 10th day finding them in the garden behind her mother's inn, lolling the rest day away in the rare summer heat. The brevity of such pleasures had always made her inclined to enjoy the sunshine. They used to joke a frontier summer began in flame rule and was ended by Eliasias, and that this was certainly not the case in Tethur, had yet to extinguish her enjoyment of the thing. Ah, how she could drink a small ale now, or perhaps a cup of chilled mead from her mother's cellars, Eshin indulging in similar reminiscences as he mused on the town just north of them.
I can't believe Marmont's just over that hill. When the guards came for me, I didn't think I'd ever live to see it again. Well, to be fair, you haven't yet, mate,
quipped Lucian.
I expect your old boss doesn't know how lucky he is in that, eh?
A round of grim chuckling, Etine's grin taking on a wistful edge.
And to think once we were as close as brothers. So, you're not tempted to sneak back for revenge, then?
Asked Chell, lolling next to Belid in a manner that suggested such effort would be beyond her.
What, against Arbor?
Eshin confirmed, at last naming his betrayer.
No, best let it die. It is so sad,
sighed Lindrel,
the way the blood can come between people. How long had you and he been friends? Oh, a good 10 years, I'd say. Arbor's a few years older than me, he used to keep an eye on me when I was growing up, and got me my first job clearing cups at the gambling hall. Well, it was his father's back then, of course.
The rueful smile was back and tugging at Etine's mouth.
Ah, the scrapes we'd get into. And then he found out you were a ballspawn and he just abandoned you to the guards?
Asked Godith. Eshin shrugged.
Well, after a fashion. I had known I was of the children since I was 20, when my mother passed on. She told me on her deathbed, and I told a few others I trusted not long after, Arbor and his new wife, Corinne, being two of them. Ah, Corinne was such a pretty thing, far too good for him. He promised he'd straighten out after they married, turn the hall into a respectable inn, but he never did. Well, you know how these things happen. We used to joke Arbor always drank as much ale as he sold, and one night after she had put him to bed, we were having a drink together after the hall had closed, and one thing led to another. You slept with his wife?
Cried Rowan.
You bastard!
Laughed Curry. Eshin was laughing himself, a warm chuckle that bubbled right from his stomach, and Erina found herself smiling too, if only for whom it recalled to her.
We swore, at first, it would only be that one time, but Arbor found out just as this whole ballspawn thing was kicking off, and the next thing I know, I've turned up for my shift and half the garrison has arrived to arrest me. Well, I've changed my mind,
snorted Lindril, shaking the long fringe from his eyes.
I think you got off quite lightly, because I'd have killed you. Wait.
He stopped suddenly, the look on his face enough to banish every smile there as he craned his neck above the bank.
I can hear horses.
A few hurried to their feet, Erina standing as well to see the approaching rider, a second horse cantering along behind him, the man cloaked despite the heat. Gideon was taking no chances.
Seth, knock an arrow. Jole. Wait,
cut in Lindril, green eyes squinting against the glare,
it's a thick with the horses. A thick, what's wrong?
Cried Erina as the man finally thundered to a halt before them, cloak thrown back to reveal his ruddy face.
Why are you cloaked? Where are the supplies? I didn't have time to get them. Jaehaera, she's been taken in by the Harpers. They've arrested her.
Cried Sarandah.
Can they even do that? Well, they have, Flower. But why?
Reasoned Seth.
She said she was one of them. She also said they don't like her associating with us children,
reminded Chell darkly. Erina swallowed the sudden tightness to her throat.
What do you think they'll do? I don't know,
said Athik baldly,
but there was no love lost between her and people who came for her.
His words seemed to remove all semblance of calm.
We should leave, get out of here. Oh, shut up, Jole,
snapped Ariane.
Anyone would think Baal was the god of cowards the way you go on. So what are we going to do?
Pressed Eshin. A long pause as all considered it.
Did you see where they took her?
Asked Inrik. Athik shrugged.
I followed for a bit, the town is crawling with guards and leading 2 horses. She could have told them we're here already,
said Amos.
Joel's right, we should go. Go where, fool?
Snapped Morgan.
Jaehaera was leading us somewhere safe. Well, now we'll just have to strike off on our own, we'll be all right, no one's looking for us up here. Yeah, we can all leave,
growled Gideon, the low timbre of his voice somehow cutting through the panic about him.
And we'll likely all be fine, too, but this ain't about that. Jaehaera got taken because she was trying to help us. There were rules in the slums, you robbed, you murdered, you did whatever you had to survive, but you never betrayed your gang. Anyone who wants to leave, then go, but you ain't a part of this group anymore, so don't expect to be coming along with us when we leave here for that haven. Or for the jail,
muttered Lucian. Erina ignored him, the time for arguments was over.
So what is the plan? Jahara mentioned she had a contact at the Oyster and Pearl,
offered Athik.
We could start there.
The girl nodded, trying to feel the same resolve she hoped she was projecting. Jahara had charged her with these people in her absence, and now she would have to prove herself up to the task.
Good. Well, it looks as though we're going to be walking now. We can't afford a barge and the Harpers won't be getting us on one, or not one heading where any of us would want to go. We'll split into 2 groups. Most of us can head to the river and begin walking upstream. I don't know where Jahara was heading, but it was in that direction, I'm sure. If we don't catch up to you, well, do what you can to survive and leave Tethur. Athik and I will take a smaller group into the city and attempt to rescue. Any volunteers?
About her, 6 hands slowly raised, a team of 8, including her and Athik. It would be enough. Athik nodded once.
Right, then, Rowan and Saranda, enter the city with the horses and stock up on supplies, then join the others moving upstream. With any luck, we'll meet up with you soon.
Erina rose with the rest of them, Athik at her side as the group seemed to instinctively split, Rowan helping Saranda mount one of the horses, as Belid mildly organized those leaving, Gideon, Enric and the rest of the volunteers gathering in a grim knot on the northern bank. Athik watched the activity with a sigh.
I never should have let them take her in the first place. This isn't your fault. Athik.
Another deep sigh, she was unused to seeing the man so pensive.
Erina, did you ever imagine when we left the frontier lands, even after we left Saradush, we would be here one day, avoiding soldiers and Harpers to lead some group of children across Tethur in a mad bid to halt Bal's return? No, but I always knew I would be with you.
Erina smiled, suddenly infused with that same feeling she had had when she had first left home with him all those years ago, that young girl, so nervous and green and yet filled with a stirring belief that, when stood together, nothing was without their reach.
Come, Athik, we've not lost yet.
End of chapter.